Hey everyone, it's Jen.
And this is Lindsay.
And welcome back to Corpus Delicti, the podcast. We are still right there in our missing person series. And tonight, we've got a really interesting case for you.
Yes, and I will give you a fair warning. It does talk about children, and it is very heavy. But it's an important story because you can always hope. And there is a little sliver of hope in this case. So we really wanted to make sure that it got talked about. But do know going into it that it is very, very sad. But without further ado, we will go ahead and kick it off. And this takes place on April 16th, 1990 in Richmond, Virginia. And this day started off as a very normal day for Tambra Ellis and her two sons, Basil Abdul Faruq, who was 8 years old, and Jamal Abdul Faruq, who was 7, at their apartment on Clarkson Road. But before we talk about that day, let's talk a little bit about the family. Tambra worked at the local DuPont plant, and she was also in the Army Reserves. Tambra and her ex-husband, Everett Abdul Faruq, were no longer together, but they were what we would call today co-parenting. They were both very involved in both of the boys' lives. They shared custody, and they had divorced after 7 years of marriage. Everett has since remarried, and he and his new wife had a baby. And both of the boys, Basil and Jamal, attended E.S.H. Green Elementary School.
Basil was in 3rd grade and Jamal was in 2nd grade. The brothers were described as very different. Jamal was more playful, the one who liked to have fun. Basil was very intellectual and was full of information and just soaked it all up. So back to April 16th, 1990, Tambra had returned home from the night shift and was naturally very exhausted. Later that day around 2:30, Basil and Jamal were dropped off by their stepmother, Shauna, after having time spent with their father, Everett, and this was for spring break. After a while, the boys asked to go outside to play. It's spring break. They wanted to enjoy their time off of school. Tambra agreed so she could take a really quick nap. She wasn't worried because they played outside quite often. There was always other kids and family outside. Also, they walked themselves to school every day.
Tambra got some shut-eye, and she wakes up and she goes to call the boys in for dinner. Sources do vary on this. Some say that she was asleep for about 30 minutes. Some say that it was a few hours, and there's multiple sources for both. I personally am inclined to think that if they went outside at 2:30 and she was calling them in for dinner, that it was more likely hours, but can't say that for sure. But when she called them to come inside, they did not answer. And in fact, she didn't see them anywhere. The boys liked to play in the parking lot on the other side of an adjacent apartment building, and they would go and play in the parking lot, which was right across from woods, and it was surrounded by apartments on 3 sides. So you've got a parking lot in the middle, a building that kind of U's around the parking lot, and woods on the other side. So she starts searching around the apartment complex. Nothing. She checked the convenience store and the park right nearby. Nothing. She searched and she called for them for what had to be a completely agonizing and torturous 45 minutes before she decided, I need to call the police. I can't find them anywhere.
Over 20 police officers arrived to help. This is amazing. This is a huge task force coming out. They're searching with helicopters, scent dogs. They're going door to door in the area. The Army Reserves unit Tambra was in even came out to help. They started with the area closest to the apartment complex, and then they started to go outwards from there. The dogs did apparently hit on the kid's scent and followed it to 7-Eleven at the corner, but it ended there. They knocked on a total of 800 doors and went to 200 vacant apartments. One of Tambra's friends said that she saw Jamal in the front of the apartment building swinging on a tree limb around 3 p.m.
So at this time, they're not suspecting anything sinister or anything like that because they're just kicking this off. They're like, you know what? They probably wandered off, got lost. We're not jumping to worst case scenario yet. And they thought this because, for one, someone would have, if there was something nefarious going on here, had to have taken not one, but both boys. And that would take more work, more coordination. There would have been more noise. It would have been a lot more likely for there to have been a witness. But the search went through the night and on into the next day. So this search involved these really wet, muddy areas back in these woods, and approximately 450 people had come forward, whether they were police officers in the Army Reserves, volunteers, neighbors, friends, and they were all drudging through all of this mud and wetness for hours and hours on end. There was a Red Cross van that was set up to help, and volunteers would go to the van, lean against it, and take naps while they left their socks and shoes out to dry. And then they'd go back out again and start the search up again. And they were even going as far as to crawl through drain pipes. But unfortunately, there was no sign of Basil and Jamal.
That evening, there was a prayer vigil held, and about 40 people gathered, including the grandparents. Their grandfather couldn't understand why anyone would take the boys, saying, "We don't have enemies. We don't have any money." Everett, the dad, put up $5,000 in reward money for information leading either to the children's safe return or leading to their arrest and the conviction of whoever took them. On April 17th, it hit the papers. And here's what the first article reported. Police were searching early this morning for 2 black children missing from their South Side home yesterday afternoon. The boys, Jamal Abdul Faruq, 7, and his brother, Basil Abdul Faruq, 8, were last seen at their home. Jamal is described as 4 feet tall, weighing 47 pounds. He was wearing a black Batman t-shirt, blue jeans, white tennis shoes. Basil is described as 4 feet 6 inches tall, weighing 45 pounds. He was wearing a black and white striped shirt, black jeans, and blue tennis shoes. Both have brown eyes, black hair, and medium complexions.
So the search continued on for yet another day. They keep thinking maybe they just got lost, but it just keeps going on and on. So a motorhome was used as a command center across the street from the apartment, and city and county police created a 24-hour tip line. So most of the calls they did get quite a number of calls, but most were people, reporting suspicious people they saw around parks or dumpsters. A few said that they had seen the boys, but none of those were able to be verified. And one person said that they saw 2 freshly dug holes in South Richmond. Police were doing the right thing. They checked all this out, all the sightings. They even sent officers and scent dogs to these 2 freshly dug holes, and they sent them with shovels, but ultimately they found nothing. They said it could have been something as simple as someone digging for bait, like worms if they were going fishing, and it led to nothing that was helpful in the investigation. So authorities asked people to, even at night, turn on their outside lights, check in their yards, check in their garages, any sheds, anywhere where a kid could be hiding, and to have them on at night as well, to really have everybody involved in looking. Where are the crevices? Where are the trees? Where have we not looked yet?
The neighborhood is really feeling this. It's not only one, but it's 2 kids. One neighbor started a ribbon campaign where they tied ribbons to trees to raise awareness and show support. Some bought treats with them on the search just in case they found the boys. Like maybe a granola bar or candy to kind of get them through because they might be hungry. So now we're talking 3 days. These are 3 very painstaking mother and father's worst nightmare. So these days have been years to them. On this 3rd day at 1:20 in the afternoon, police do get more information on one of the boys. Sweet little Basil's body had been found 10 miles from the apartment. It was located in a landfill. A truck driver who had worked for the landfill had seen a plastic garbage bag. At first, he didn't think anything about it until he saw what looked to be a human body inside. Basil had been stabbed to death, specifically twice in the back, and also had a fractured skull post-mortem. He had been bound and gagged with duct tape, and this is a small small breath of relief here, there isn't any sign of sexual assault. He is fully clothed. They couldn't confirm this publicly until 10 p.m. that evening. Of course, the family is absolutely devastated, but it's also alarming because where is Jamal? All right, now we're going to be back into Jamal and Basil's story. So now the parents are even more in a rush to find Jamal because they think and we hope that they can find him safe. Authorities did an extensive search and a thorough search of the landfill, which is made up of about 90 dumpsters, paying particular attention to bags. They're using shovels, they're wearing gloves. They moved all the bags to a clear spot, and then they would rake through the piles with a backhoe. Authorities thought it was most likely that Basil was not killed or dumped directly into the landfill, but probably somewhere else and ended up there via a garbage truck. This proved to be a challenge because this particular landfill was a site for multiple city locations. Police were able to identify the garbage truck assigned to the plot where his body was discovered, but its route involved nearly 100 dumpsters. They searched as well as they could, but again, there is no sign of Jamal. They checked trash bins and dumpsters near the home.
So you've got 90 dumpsters in the landfill, then another 100 that it services. And they dug through basically almost 200 dumpsters looking for him. I mean, that's a big undertaking.
That's intense.
I
mean, not only from the very beginning, you had hundreds of police, you had hundreds of volunteers, you have her unit from the military come out, and now helicopters and scent dogs, and now they're going through all these dumpsters. This community is doing everything in their power to find Jamal. It's just so heartwarming that, because a lot of these missing person cases don't come close to what we're seeing here.
So where does any investigation start? Of course, it's going to start with those closest to the victims. So we know that sweet Basil has been murdered and we're looking for Jamal. So Everett and Tambra were investigated and questioned heavily, and so was Shauna, the stepmother. But early on, they actually thought that Basil might have been killed in the father's house. They did search his house and they investigated him thoroughly. And the warrant stated that they were looking for blood, towels, bodily fluids, instruments, and diapers, which is interesting. They were looking for diapers because when they found Basil, there was a dirty diaper in that bag with him. So we know that he was sadly placed in a trash bag and there was a dirty diaper in there as well. And they're thinking, well, Everett and Shauna, so the dad and his new wife, did have an infant, and that's how they made that link. So they ended up taking duct tape, a sheet of paper from a legal pad, and several bloody tissues that had been found in a trash bag. However, all of this information about the warrant was not known for a month. Authorities intended to keep it sealed, but Everett fought it, and he wanted to know because he's like, look, I'm their father. Why were they so focused in on me to where they were looking for specific things in my home? So he fought it, and that's how they found out specifically what was on that warrant. So we bring this up for a reason, because those items maybe sound a little weird, right? Duct tape, bloody tissues. We know that Basil had been bound and gagged. And then Everett refused to take a polygraph. And he stated that it was because it went against his Muslim religious beliefs. Now, to be fair, polygraphs are crap anyway, so don't blame him there. But here's why we bring this up. Both Tambra and Everett were cooperative from the first second. Even though he did not take the polygraph, he didn't have to. That was his right to not take that. And they were both cleared. And the police have flat out said since, it's not them. We know it's not them. And I think it's a good lesson in remaining neutral in true crime and trying to actually follow the trail, because it's easy to jump to conclusions sometimes. When you see what they found in the house, they found the duct tape. Well, Basil was bound. There was a diaper in the bag. Oh, there's diapers in the home. You can kind of start to get suspicious. But sometimes there's a perfectly normal explanation, such as the bloody nose that had happened in the house, hence the bloody tissues. So it's just important to always follow that trail all the way through. So this is why circumstantial evidence can sometimes really be tricky.
Meanwhile, Basil's funeral was so packed, they actually had to start turning away visitors. They couldn't hold any more people. The boys were raised in an interfaith household where a Christian mother and a Muslim father, and leaders from both faiths offered to help lead services. There's a picture in one of the old newspapers that shows the line just pouring out into the street. In the funeral program, like in the obituaries, Jamal was listed as surviving relatives. This has got to be hard. You know, when you're reading this as a parent, it's just got to be so hard to see that. Everett ended up speaking at one point about how he and his wife and Tambra felt like the police were more interested in questioning him than keeping the family up to date. He said that whenever they came over, it was never offering updates. It was always questioning him. And this is hard because you have to balance ruling people in and out and dealing with the family of the victim. I get it. But ultimately, this is still the victim's family. He said, look, we know we can't know everything. We get it. But we can be told something. And he also said at one time, authorities tricked him into coming down to the station just to get a palm print, but instead started grilling him. They also started talking to him about the case where a person accidentally killed a child. So what they're doing is they're trying to manipulate the situation. And, Everett said, they were trying to suggest to me that I killed my son by accident. They obviously have no true viable leads at this point.
But here's what happened. They didn't tell the family until they had ruled them out, right? They're trying to, make sure that they're not giving information to the killer or whatever. And so they don't want to give anything away prematurely. But what ended up happening is the family found out from the news. So they're still putting the information out there. And I cannot imagine this family's heartbreak getting no information from the police, but they turn on the news and they're finding out my son was actually stabbed. My son was bound and gagged. And I just can't imagine learning it that way. But in May, a man named Thomas Burton came home from work and he took a shortcut walking through from the road to his house and noticed a skull 25 feet from the house. Initially, authorities, because he did do the right thing and called authorities, thought that it might have belonged to Jamal, but it was quickly determined that it was the skull of an adult. And I can't imagine that either, because you don't want it to be your child, because that means that they are unfortunately dead. But also, it's still not an answer and means that they're still missing. It's another day of not knowing.
And it's another family finding out
Absolutely.
a loved one is dead. Now, later in 1990, supermarket ads and coupons that were in the newspaper included pictures of Jamal. Jamal's case was featured on America's Most Wanted. One of the detectives that worked his case was actually in the studio and was taking tips from viewers. In April 1991, just a year later, there was an interesting article in the Associated Press. Police said that they believe they knew who abducted Jamal and had killed Basil, but just didn't have enough evidence to follow through. Captain James Baroque said, I feel confident, as do the detectives in this case, that they have in fact interviewed the person who has knowledge of the disappearance, and in all probability, the deaths. We're still short on proof, but we haven't given up on the case. All right, so of course, they're not going to say who the suspect is, but they did say it was someone who knew both of the boys. They clarified real quickly, it is not the mother and it's not the father. They also said it was possible that they did not work alone. as a mother, you're thinking, who does my child know? And all of your friends at that point become suspects.
Yeah, you don't
Like
know.
you can't trust anyone around you.
I can't even imagine. At one point, Jamal was listed on a flyer made by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And it was really sad because his sweet little picture was right next to Johnny Gosh, which is another really well-known child case. And that just struck me because Johnny Gosh is such a big name, but Jamal is really not, and it was just sad seeing him next to him. So in 2009, two noteworthy tips came in, and both of these tips said that Jamal was still alive and living in Hinesville, Georgia. So for one of these, a person said that they saw someone in Walmart. They said it looked just like the age progressed photo because they had created an age progressed photo by this point. The caller thought the man was wearing jeans and a red t-shirt with a Nike logo on it. Now, the problem is they didn't know the caller's identity, so this tip was left as a message. You can just call in and leave it. Problem is, though, whatever info is missing, you have to try and track it down yourself. So this caller didn't leave their name or their contact information, so police could not call them back and say, who are you? What aisle did you see him in? What time was it? Anything like that. So they pulled Walmart surveillance, but they couldn't confirm the caller or Jamal because that's where do you start? How long ago was it? Was it last week? Was it last year? And you're just now seeing the picture and putting two and two together. They've got nothing
And how many
to go
people?
on.
How many people visit a Walmart daily?
Right. So a few days later, they got another tip, and the person said he had a friend that he thought looked a lot like the age progressed photo that had been released. And then he had been at the friend's house and seen pictures of the friend as a child and said that those pictures looked a lot like the original pictures of Jamal. And he lived in Hinesville, Georgia. So two tips within the relative same time frame, both saying he's alive and both specifically saying Hinesville, Georgia. That's interesting. It's not, Atlanta. It's not LA. It's not New York City, this big place where you might, mistake a lot of different people because you're seeing so many people. Both of them said Hinesville, Georgia.
So Jamal's going to be about 27 years old, and this is going to be around the time that those tips came in. This is two ties to Hinesville, which is what Lindsay was talking about earlier. And in 2010, the duct tape was sent for DNA analysis. However, no updates came from that. Today, Jamal would be 40 years old. His mother thinks that Basil was killed because he was always protective over his little brother and was probably trying to protect him. Certain authorities on the case actually believe there's a chance he may be alive because of the two tips randomly naming the same town. And to reiterate, at the time he went missing, we're just going to run through the description for you guys. He was wearing a black Batman t-shirt, blue jeans, a gray and red fleece baseball jacket, and a white pair of sneakers. Jamal is an African American male, black hair, brown eyes. He has a scar on his right eyebrow and a mole on his temple above his left ear. He had a small gap between his upper front teeth at the time of disappearance. So he's still young. His mouth is still growing. Could he have had braces later on? We don't know. And we are assuming he is alive and we can find him. The Charley Project says Jamal's favorite food in 1990, of course, every kid's favorite, is pizza. He enjoyed playing and watching basketball and watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles videos. He was in the 2nd grade at his elementary school at the time of his disappearance. Authorities believe it is possible that he can still be alive. Detectives ask anyone with information concerning the case to contact Metro Richmond Crime Stoppers at 804-780-1000.
I cannot even begin to imagine what this family has been through. It's
And it's going through.
still going through, for sure. Both boys. I am sure, in fact, I know because it was in the research that Tambra had a lot of guilt. And my kids at ages 7 and 8 played outside in the neighborhood without me. She shouldn't feel guilty. It's a very normal thing for children to go outside and play in the place where you feel safe, you know? And she said it took her a long time to be able to forgive herself for that. But, you know, and she said that she holds it very close. She doesn't tell a lot of people who come into her life now about what happened until she gets real close to them. She said it's almost sort of like a sacred piece of her that she doesn't share that information with just anybody, you know? And I feel for all of them, and I'm very curious. So the DNA from the tape was sent off in 2010. I'm assuming it was inconclusive because there's nothing out there. And if it linked that person that they thought it was, they probably would have made an arrest by now.
Yeah, they would have made an arrest pretty quickly after the results would have come back in. I keep going back into my head about they had to have known the abductors and that the abductors knew both boys, you know, but, you know, kids are kids. They're going to be outside. They're going to play. You can't feel guilty for watching two responsible kids who are watching each other's backs. They're playing together. They're outside. Mom just busted her ass working night shift.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I can't imagine. And there was a lot of talk online about the search and how there were so many dumpsters and people were like, you know, is it possible they missed something? And
It's
I would
always a
imagine
possibility.
it's always a possibility. I would think, and I don't know, I've never done it, but I would think though, because they took all the bags, remember, they took all the bags and put them in an open area and then combed through the bags. If they're moving those bags, they're going to know. I mean, both boys were in the 40 to 50 pound range. They're going to know this bag is heavy. Let's look at this one. You know what I'm saying? And I hate to say it that way because it sounds terrible that they were, or that Basil was in a dumpster. It's horrifying, but I'm inclined to think that they were pretty thorough because I think you would feel that if they're pulling all the bags out. But
we're also assuming that Jamal and Basil were dumped at the same time.
True.
I mean, they could have held back or gone to a different dump or a different dumpster on a different circuit. But, you know, would they have dumped both boys at the same time? Or would they have kind of broken it up in case one is found? So we're working off of assumptions that they were dumped. If they were to be dumped together, you would have found Jamal as well. There are no certainties.
It's just it's thought-provoking to me. The theory, you know, their mom had said, I think that Basil was probably protecting Jamal and that's why he ended up getting killed. It's just so, you would want to say that, oh my gosh, well, if Jamal is still alive, doesn't he know he's been kidnapped? But not necessarily, because criminals can be so good at brainwashing people and, oh, your mom told me to come get you. She wants you to live with me now. And, you know, erasing that old identity out of you.
He was 7. I have a 7-year-old, and, you know, at that point, you know, they're saying we've seen it before, you tell anybody, your family, I will hurt your family, I'll kill your family. And, you know, he has been with his captors for years and years and years and years and years.
If that's what happened. Yeah, right.
If that's what happened. But now that he's, in his 40s, you would hope and think, unless they spun a story saying, hey, your parents didn't want you.
And I would imagine they probably, if that's what happened, did give him a new name. I don't know how I particularly feel on it. I don't know what I personally think happened because there's just so little to go on. I mean, you can speculate all day long, but there's nothing anywhere, at least that's public, to know what might have happened.
I think the police are working off the assumption that Jamal probably did not survive the kidnapping.
Yeah, they say it's possible, but it's
never a guarantee.
But it's, it's also likely that if one unfortunately was killed, that the other one could be as well. But the Hinesville, Georgia thing is interesting because that's two in a very specific place, But again, I would have to assume, and it's an assumption, never make assumptions, but you would assume that they went to talk to him to see, is that him? So maybe it's not. Now, the Walmart video, when they couldn't do anything with, but this other guy, were they able to go? Did they get his information and go there and say, hey, are you, is this you? Do a DNA test or whatever? I don't know. I couldn't find that anywhere. So I don't know if that caller left enough information for them to follow up on it or not. The not knowing in all these stories is so heartbreaking. And then I also wonder about Basil as well. And he was bound and gagged. So that just seems so nefarious to me. It doesn't seem like you're sticking up for your brother, so it's a spur of the moment thing because you made me mad. To me that just seems, I don't know.
It's more premeditated.
It seems
an emotional reaction.
Yeah, it just seems more intentional to me as a non-professional. And I hope at the end of the day, I hope that he is alive and that he can be found.
Now, we do have breaking news in the Birmingham kidnapping of Cupcake McKinney. It actually just broke this past week. Lindsay and I have followed this case, and it's about this poor little girl getting kidnapped in Birmingham, and they found her, was a couple of days later in a dumpster.
Yeah,
and
very similar, actually.
This rocked the town. Mm-hmm. Everyone in Birmingham knew Cupcake's name at the end of this, just the horrific circumstances around it. Well, one of the perpetrators, the allegedly kidnapper, he went on trial this past 2 weeks. On Friday, he was found guilty.
Yeah, it's not allegedly anymore.
Not allegedly anymore.
Yep.
Now, the girlfriend didn't want to have her trial in Birmingham because she says she can't get a fair trial. So they're going to move it down to Tuscaloosa. But he was found guilty. And, they showed some really graphic pictures in the jury, and they only took an hour. That's how certain these people were.
Quickest jury deliberation I think I've ever heard of. And Cupcake's case did make national news, which is why we bring it up. A lot of people were following it at the time because she was only 3. And so Jen and I have talked about probably covering her case coming up once the other perpetrator stands trial. Because, again, she's this precious, innocent child who just had her entire life in front of her. Unfortunately, there are bad people out there.
But then we just covered the 3 women who were inside the house, inside their own house, and they mysteriously disappeared. So,
yeah,
guys, it
can happen to anyone.
Lock your windows, lock your doors. When you're walking out and about, keep your eyes up. So just be careful. And like I told Lindsay the other day, with all these runners 2 runners that made the national news getting kidnapped or assaulted or followed, I started running with my phone again. And I haven't ran with my phone in years.
Worry about you running too. Just anybody. My brother too. I worry about him too because I don't know. It's just.
I will say, when I went out there, I waited till sunrise, and I got out there on the trail that I run for long runs. I got out there at 6:30, which is normally late because usually you want to start around 5 a.m. But since the sun's coming up later and later and later, I don't get out there until sunrise. There's a lot of people out there with headlamps, and I saw several running with mace.
Yeah.
Or a pepper spray or whatever it is now that you can get. I saw a lot of that. And it's a lot more than what used to be.
But coming up, we have obviously several. We're probably planning on running this series through the end of the year, but we'll play it by ear. Just so you know, I am out of town at the end of the month, but we are not skipping an episode. Here's what we're doing. We still have an episode. It's still within the series. It is going to be slightly shorter than a normal episode because what we didn't want to keep any missing people where not everyone could hear it, just because these cases are important, because there's always hope in these cases. So we took, or are taking, our Patreon episode from September, and we're going to use the episode part as the episode. So we're still going to have, we do 30 minutes of an episode, 30 minutes of hanging out. That 30 minutes is still sacred to our Patreons.
Yeah, you don't get to hear it.
But we're going to at least take the episode. That way these missing persons cases can be out there. We don't have to necessarily have time off, even though behind the scenes we have time off. And that's the plan for the off time that we have coming up for holidays and all that. So,
yeah, and closer to Halloween, we got some interesting stories. We're going to do a 2-in-1 special for our Halloween show. It may or may not involve a UFO.
All right.
We'll leave it there. I was intrigued too. I have my very strong opinions on what really happened.
What?
Yeah, it happens. Especially when it comes to aliens. Okay. All right. Exciting news. Patreons and Patreon only. We are doing our live episode October 25th at 7 Central Time. So what does that get you? Remember when we were talking about that behind the scenes conversation, that kind of stuff. It's going to be fun. Lindsay has got this amazing story, and I don't want you to miss out on it. So go to patreon.com/Corpus Delicti and join the membership. $3 and above gets you on our Discord page where you get to chat up with us and all of our fun followers 24/7 pretty much.
Did you like my face when you said I had an outline? I was like, do I?
It's going to be amazing.
Okay, pressure's on.
Don't fail us.
Because I don't have one yet.
All right, guys. Until then, you know what they said to Felicia.
Bye.
Bye.